Good afternoon from Indonesia. Hello, everybody attending here on Zoom and Facebook. Welcome to the 21st Century English Teacher Express held by the British Council in partnership with Peartree Languages and English Academy by Ruang Guru. My name is Arik, an English teacher at English Academy by Ruang Guru, the moderator today for the first session. The topic for the first session today is developing critical thinking skills. So as we all know, critical thinking is a key 21st century skill that we all need in order to navigate the world around us on a daily basis. In this session, we will first explore what is meant by critical thinking by looking at some definitions and suggesting why it is important for teachers to help their students to develop an analytical mindset. We will differentiate between what we understand as critical thinking for younger and older students and suggest varying approaches and practical applications for the classroom, including a project-based learning approach and utilizing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We will explore the role of the teacher in critical thinking activities as a facilitator rather than a contributor, and provide examples of best practice when creating a safe space for students to engage in critical thinking that accounts for general safeguarding and also inclusivity. This session will be delivered by our expert trainer, Nikki Peartree. Let me introduce a bit about her. So Nikki is the founder and general manager of Peartree Languages, a well-established English language training provider accredited by the British Council for the Teaching of English located in Cardiff, the UK. Her teaching career began in 2002, and for over 2 decades, Nikki has been involved in many aspects of EFL teaching and learning, from assessment to course design and staff management, online learning, webinar delivery, and more recently, the project management of large-scale teacher training courses in Palestine, Ecuador, and Indonesia. In May 2022, Nikki was a presenter in IATEFL Belfast, delivering the results of a collaborative project in online learning conducted with the University of South Wales. Through the management and day-to-day operations of international junior summer schools spanning over 12 years, Nikki has enjoyed multiple opportunities to create, design, and deliver courses that positively challenge and stretch young people to reach their full potential while exploring and critically evaluating the world around them. Nikki believes passionately in the transformative power of education and is very enthusiastic about online learning as a tool for those who have previously struggled to access quality English language learning. Throughout the year, she is also the Secretary of Young Learners English UK, exploring educational best practice with industry-leading young learner member organizations. And when not at the coalface, Nikki very much enjoys spending quality time with family and friends, traveling and listening to his story podcasts. Before I hand over to Nikki, let me read the housekeeping rules first. Okay, so this session is being recorded and live streamed on British Council's Teaching English Asia Facebook. So by attending, you acknowledge that your comments may be recorded and rebroadcasted. If you have any questions, if you would like to ask any questions, please type them in the Q&A box on Zoom, if you are on Zoom, or chat box on Facebook. And bear in mind that the e-certificate will be provided at the end of the session, and you will be given a link to complete a event survey. Okay, so link to download e-certificate will be provided after you submit your feedback later. So without further ado, let's welcome the speaker, Nikki Peartree. Nikki, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I would just like to start to share my screen with you now. So I'm just going to do that. If you wouldn't mind just letting me know if you can see my screen. Arik, can we see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, great. So thank you very much to Eric for that wonderful introduction. I am not going to say very much more about myself. I will just simply say my name is Nikki and I am here today to talk to you about developing critical thinking skills as part of the 21st Century English Teacher Express webinar series. Now, I love thinking. Thinking is one of my favorite things to do, but as well as thinking, I also really like interacting and sharing knowledge. And if you are also a teacher or a trainer who likes to do that, likes to share knowledge and experience, then I would really, really urge you to join our Padlet page. This is an online community of practice that we have established in conjunction with this webinar series. And it is a great place to do just that. Think a little bit and then interact. Okay, so let's move on. All of our sessions on this series are all mapped to the British Council CPD framework. Okay, so this session is no exception. And we are going to have a look here. We can see that critical thinking, which is our topic of today, very much sits within the promoting 21st century skills area on that British Council CPD framework. Okay, so let's move on and have a look at what we're actually going to talk about today. Now, I've got lots and lots of things that I would love to have the opportunity to share with you today. This is a whistle-stop tour. I would also like to say at this stage, hopefully we've got a few more people in the space by now. So a very, very warm welcome to, first of all, people watching us live. I've already seen a few names in the chat, even that I recognize from our Indonesian teacher training project, Nusantara Go. So a big hello, a warm welcome to those participants. Also, I'd like to say a very warm welcome to anybody joining us online on Facebook, who might be watching this through a live stream. Also, if you weren't able to join us live today, no worries, not a problem at all. You might be watching it on YouTube, or you may be watching this via a website later on. You are very, very welcome. Very nice to see you here, and we're very happy to share our knowledge with you. So what are we going to do today? Whistle stop tour, let's get to it. So first of all, we are going to have a look at what we mean by critical thinking. Okay, what is critical thinking? Next, we are going to explore why the skill of critical thinking is so important. We're going to consider critical thinking versus, or in addition to, creative thinking. All right, are they the same? Are they different, etc.? We will be coming on to that. I'm going to give you some practical examples of critical thinking activities in the EFL classroom, both for younger learners and older learners. So we are very much targeting this series at teachers of secondary, lower secondary and primary school age. So we'll be having a look at some examples that might be suitable for your students across that kind of age range. We're also going to touch on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Huge topic, which we could develop, devote an entire webinar series to in itself, but we are just going to touch on that a little bit. And finally, I'm going to outline the importance of the teacher's role in creating the right kind of atmosphere to allow critical thinking to take place in the EFL classroom. All right, so I believe I've been talking now for a good couple of minutes. I actually just pressed my stopwatch. I should have done that a few moments ago, but let's take a look. I would like you to start to get a little bit more involved. All right, so you will see on your screen, you have two ways to do that. You have a chat box, all right, and you also have a Q&A box. So the Q&A box is where you can ask any questions. And my Peartree colleague, John, who you're going to hear from a little bit later today, is going to be having a look at those questions. He will either answer them or he will collect them for our Q&A at the end. But if you've got something a little bit more dynamic you would like to say, or I ask you to interact, we're going to do that in the chat box. If you haven't already, please do write down your name, where you're from. If you know us, say hi you know us. We would really like to see that. Okay, so first task for you, what is critical thinking? Put it in the chat for me. Tell me, what is critical thinking? Okay, great. We've got an answer from Brian. Thinking that is critical. Good. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts on that? What is critical thinking? Or what is critical then in that case, if it's thinking that is critical? If I say critical thinking, what comes to your mind? Oh, nice, Irene. Okay, nice. Thinking beyond what's obvious. Okay, we've got some coming in now. Thick and fast, thick and fast. Nice. Okay, thinking in many different aspects. Objective analysis. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, deep thinking. Okay, that forms judgment. Judgment, perhaps not exactly the word, but maybe conclusions. Okay, considering both sides of a coin. I like that, both sides of the coin. In fact, there's a reference to an article about something being both sides of the coin coming up later. Okay, everybody. So thank you very much for your contributions. So perhaps we should just say at this point that I've introduced this gentleman to you. You may already know who he is. He is the Thinker by Rodin, a pretty famous sculpture of a man who is deep in thought, lost in thought, okay? And the point is, we all think, yeah? We all think. You're probably thinking about something right now. But, and here is the big but, what is the difference between normal thinking and critical thinking? So when we think, are you thinking in a focused way? Are you thinking in an active way or a passive way? Okay, are the thoughts in your mind actually analyzing? Are they assessing? Okay, or are they just notions that are kind of passing through your subconscious? Is this mindful listening? Is it thinking? Is it skillful thinking? Are you reconstructing, deconstructing your thoughts? In other words, are you thinking in a higher order? Are these higher order thinking skills, or are they lower order thinking skills? Okay, so let me just move on here. So if we were looking for a definition, we could say this, all right? So this is a definition that is taken from the Cambridge Dictionary. So basically, the process of thinking carefully about a subject or an idea without allowing feelings or opinions to affect you. And this second part is pretty important, okay? So we're talking about not allowing feelings and opinions to affect you. But we have a little expression in English, and that expression is to put your thinking cap on. Okay, put your thinking cap on. Now, this is something that my mum always used to say to me when she wanted me to think very carefully about something. She'd say, Nikki, put your thinking cap on. All right. And actually today, some of you may know, is actually when we're doing this live, this is the 1st of March. Now, I am in Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales. And today is our national day. It's St. David's Day. So I'm actually going to put on my thinking cap here, everybody. All right. So this is a Welsh rugby hat. This is the symbol of Wales. And I would just like to give you this visual reminder that if we were looking for a definition for critical thinking, we could say critical thinking is thinking with your thinking cap on. And the thinker also has his thinking cap on. Okay, so if you're looking for an explanation to explain the difference between thinking and critical thinking, remember me with my thinking cap on. Okay, happy St. David's Day, everybody. I'm going to take that off for a moment. Okay, so a bit more of a fleshed out definition here. When we think critically, we address people, ideas, and situations with the following, okay? An open mind, an analytical thought process, an understanding that we are not always right, the willingness to communicate, a listening ear, and a creative approach to problem solving, okay? And we're trying to reach an evidence-based conclusion or decision. And I've actually highlighted the word creative there, because if you remember from my intro, I told you that we were also going to be looking at creative thinking. However, the word creative has already crept into our definition of critical thinking. You may see a couple of another word there that starts with the letter C, communicate, all right? And we will come back to that later on as well. So remember, critical thinking, we are talking about evidence, analysis, assessment. This is the difference here between higher order thinking and lower order thinking. And if you need a few more adjectives, just to get your mind in gear, okay, about what exactly critical thinking is, you've got a little mind map there. I'm not going to read all of them out because these slides are available. So you will be able to get your hands on these slides and really deep dive, take a big delve into all of this vocabulary. If you like making word clouds, which I do, I've also put a little reference on the bottom there for a tool, a free online tool that you can use to make word clouds for your class. Okay, so we have now looked at a definition of what critical thinking is, okay, what it is, higher order thoughts, evidence, assessment, analysis. Why is critical thinking so important? So I've split this into two halves, okay? First of all, the theory. Why is critical thinking important in theory? Well, just take a moment and have a little look through this definition that we've got here. I took this from a Pearson signature event, 21st Century Skills for ELT. Okay, just take a second to read that. All right, so what we can see here is critical thinking is one of the 4 C's, okay? One of the 4 C's. And we've already seen some of these C's pop up in other places, even in our definition of critical thinking. We've already seen the word communication, right? We've already seen the word creativity. And we will come on to talk a little bit more about how these C's intersect later on when we talk about creative thinking and critical thinking. So the long and the short of it is that critical thinking is a 21st century skill, and it has been decided that we should be teaching critical thinking in order to give our students a complete education that they need to be able to function in today's global world. All right, so that's the theory. Okay, let's move on and have a look at the reality, okay, the reality. And I'm going to show you a quote here from the Foundation for Critical Thinking. Really amazing website. I would definitely recommend that you check that out. Okay, so the Foundation for Critical Thinking has told us this. Okay, so in reality, this is why critical thinking is so important. And I'm going to decode some of these words for you in a moment. But please, interestingly note that again, in a definition of what is actually critical thinking, we have the words communication, problem solving. Okay, problem solving more akin to creative thinking. Okay, so we need to overcome egocentrism and sociocentrism. All right, what does that mean? All right, so let's have a look. In other words, what the Foundation for Critical Thinking is actually saying is that critical thinking is good for us. It's good for our interpersonal communication, and it's good for our communities. We all need critical thinking in our lives. So on the one hand, we've got the theory. Yeah, we've got the powers that be, the World Education Authorities telling us critical thinking is a 21st century skill. You got to teach it. But on the other hand, we could consider that critical thinking is quite simply a skill, and it has the potential to be a very powerful tool if you can create a habit and a mindset within your students where they address every problem from a critical thinking perspective, from a higher order thinking perspective. So as educators, really, we have a duty to embed critical thinking into our lessons so that we can give our students this complete education. Also, critical thinking is an academic skill. Now, if you have students, and I'm sure you do, who will go on to higher or further education, sooner or later, they will be required to take exams which will contain tasks which have very, very heavy elements of critical thinking in them. So really, this is an important academic skill that you are giving to students. But even if your students are not destined to go on to universities, for example, or higher education, this is a life skill, all right? So we all face choices in our lives, yeah? And some of those choices are very, very, very important. And if we can approach those choices with the skill, with the mindset of critical thinking, then we are far more likely to make better choices, which will lead to better outcomes for us in our general lives. Even if we take something as basic, well, it's not basic, but something as fundamental as who do we vote for? Yeah, who do we vote for? Do we vote for somebody because our neighbor voted for them? Well, that's not critical thinking. Do we vote for somebody because our dad votes for them? Well, that's not critical thinking. Yeah. So we have social responsibilities. And if we can approach our social responsibilities, our choices, with a critically thinking mindset, then we will make better choices, we'll have better outcomes. And also it's a professional skill. All right. So in this day and age, many companies require their employees to brainstorm, to pitch, to give presentations, to meet clients, etc., etc. So all of these types of things require critical thinking. Now, there's a very important point here, which is, in order to be able to teach critical thinking, teachers have to be critical thinkers themselves. They also have to have well-developed critical thinking skills. And you may be thinking to yourself, "Ooh, I don't know if my critical thinking skills are really up to it." Yeah. So I would strongly recommend that you make a commitment to yourself to become a better critical thinker. Remember, this is a skill. Okay, this is a skill. It's something you have to work on. It's like reading and writing. This is not something that comes naturally. It doesn't come from the ether. It doesn't come from the beyond. Yeah, you have to work on it. And if you work on it, then you will build your own confidence through knowledge, and then you will become a much better practitioner of critical thinking. So I've got a little suggestion here, 5-minute TED Talk. Fantastic. I really recommend you take a look at it. It suggests a very easy 5-step framework for how to improve your own critical thinking skills. Now, I'm thinking about this more for the teacher rather than for the student, but potentially you could show it to your students if they are older or if they're in further education. And also you'll see a link at the end in the Explore Further section for an extremely good plenary session from IOTEFL that took place, I think, in 2019, where a further model is also suggested called the Discern model, which is an acronym. Each of those different letters represent a different thing that you can develop with your own critical thinking. So if you are a teacher who feels they need to develop their own critical thinking skills before they pass that on to their students, okay, I really recommend that you check out those 2 resources. Will take about an hour and a half of your time, very well worth it. All right, brilliant. Okay, so let's move on now and talk about creative thinking and critical thinking. I'm just going to quickly cast my eye over the chat there. All right, brilliant. Okay, great. Okay, so creative thinking versus critical thinking. Have a little look at this picture. So I took this picture from another TED Talk by it's quite an old one actually, by a guy called Tim Brown. And this is the circle test, okay, the circle test. So you might do this. I was actually going to ask you to do it, but I think we will run out of time if I ask you to do it, but you might want to do it yourself. You might want to do it with your students. So basically what it involves is 30 circles. You give yourself, your students 1 minute, and they have 1 minute to draw as many different objects in a circle as possible, okay? The point is here, we're going for quantity, not quality. So it doesn't matter what the drawings look like, but you can see here, you've got things like the ring pull from the top of a can. You've got a bicycle, you've got some traffic lights. Is this creative thinking or critical thinking? Tell me in the chat. Is this critical or creative? Ooh. Well, I'm very pleased to see that everybody's listening and engaged, because you all wrote something in the chat exactly at that moment. Okay, good. Yes, so pretty much across the board, everybody has said this is creative thinking. Okay, this is creative thinking. So there are various different versions of this creative thinking test. Okay, so another very famous one is the paperclip test. How many uses can you find for a paperclip? So generally, the conclusion is the more uses you can find, the more circles you can draw in a specific time limit, the more creative you are. All right. This is very playful. Now, people often think that creative thinking is more associated with kids. Yeah, so kids are more creative because kids are more playful. But there is a really interesting case to be made here for the fact that the more playful you can make your activities. So first of all, creative thinking is not only for kids. Creative thinking has to be done at all stages of our lives, yeah? But if you think about a child, children are more creative because they don't have as many fears as adults. They're not afraid of taking risks, okay? And this is often why they're able to be more creative. So if you can inject that playfulness, that creative playfulness into your older classes, then you will be more likely to have higher quality creative thinking. Okay, so how are these skills different from each other? Yeah, how are they similar? How are they different? So they're not the same thing, okay? They're not the same thing. But as we have seen with all of the C's, there is a huge amount of crossover. There's a huge amount of overlay here. So essentially, creative thinking is what we call divergent thinking, all right? It's divergent thinking. This could be things like brainstorming, imagination, questions with no right or wrong answers. And this is very often linked to productive skills. This is out of the box thinking. Yeah, so this is what we call out of the box thinking, creative thinking. Whereas critical thinking, which is the main point of our session today, critical thinking is convergent thinking. So it's not divergent, it's not out there, yeah? It's not out of the box, it's inside the box. So this is thinking which has activities with limitations, and it's usually linked to receptive skills. And most importantly, we come back again to my point at the beginning, evaluating, analyzing, assessing based on evidence. Okay, so if you are interested in this topic, I really recommend that you have a look at John Hughes's webinar. Again, link in the chat, link in the Explore Further section at the end, where he talks about this and whether or not creative and critical thinking are two sides of the same coin. Because to a certain extent, although they are different, they are both C's in the 4 C's, and there is a lot of overlap, okay? And I'm going to illustrate this in 2 ways. First of all, I'm going to illustrate it with an example from the real world. I put that in air quotes. And then I'm going to illustrate how they overlap and how they will overlap in your EFL classroom. Okay, but just before we do that, creative thinking, a definition, ability to produce original and unusual ideas or to make something new or imaginative, okay? New or imaginative, right? So coming up with solutions. Okay. So I told you that I was going to give you an example of how critical thinking and creative thinking overlap and interject in the real world, in air quotes. And I would like to tell you about one of my favorite television programs. Okay. This is called The Dragon's Den. You may have something similar in your country. So basically what we have here are a group of very rich business people, and they have money that they would like to invest. Okay, who are they going to invest it in? Well, they're going to invest it in some entrepreneurs, okay, who go to the television program. I can see some nods, so I'm thinking you might have something similar in your countries. Yeah, maybe it's got another name. I think it's called Shark Tank in the United States. We call it Dragon's Den. Okay, so you have an entrepreneur. All right. Now, the entrepreneur who's going to go on this television program and ask these dragons, these rich business people, for money, before they go onto the television program, they've experienced a process of critical thinking. All right. So they have critically thought their way around a problem, and they have identified a gap or a niche, in this case, the market. Okay, because this is the business world. So in this particular episode, we had this lady, and she had identified, so she had experienced critical thinking, and she'd identified a gap in the market for adaptive clothing for a range of disabilities. Okay, so essentially, she had her eureka moment. She came up with a solution, creative thinking. Okay, so critical thinking, then her solution, creative thinking. Her solution, create a range of adaptive clothing suitable for a range of disabilities, and go on the Dragon's Den program and ask the dragons for some money to be able to get her solution off the ground. So after she's presented her pitch, the dragons, these business people, they then enter into a period of on-the-spot critical thinking. So they are critically thinking around this investment opportunity. They ask questions like, what's your turnover? how much do you think this is going to make in the future? Okay, what's the size of the market, etc., etc. Because they are analyzing, they are gathering evidence in order to make a decision which is based on fact and not based on prejudice and not based on bias. Okay, right. So after they've asked these critical thinking questions, they then decide whether to offer the money or not. Okay, and if they offer the money, then we're able to have some creative thinking when the solution is actually taken into mass production and taken into the marketplace. So what we can see very clearly here is critical thinking, creative thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking. So this is like a kind of building blocks. Yeah, this is a scaffolding effect here. All right, so I told you about my favorite TV program, Dragon's Den, love it. Now let's have a look at how this works in your EFL classroom. So we are going to touch here on project-based learning, and I would like to tell you all about our summer school, which is called Peartree. You can actually see some of our students there in front of Cardiff Castle. So as part of Peartree students, so these are students aged between 12 and 17, to give you an idea of the age range that we're targeting here. They are required to conduct a project which is called Fixing the Future. Yeah, so the question is, how will I fix the future? And again, don't worry about reading this in immense amounts of detail, because you will have this later as part of the slides. So in order to deliver their final presentation, to their class, they have to go through a series of steps. So what I would like you to do now is to have a look at day 1. Identify a problem in your neighborhood and share an Edmodo post with your class. I've highlighted Edmodo because sadly it's not with us anymore, so we will be using a different platform this year, but just to sort of give you an idea. Is that critical thinking or creative thinking? Tell me in the chat. What do you think? Okay. All right, okay, good. I can't see Facebook, but just another little shout out to all of our people on Facebook. Hello, I'm sure you're there, I'm sure you're with us. I can't see you, but I can tell you that most people in the chat here have said, yeah, this is critical thinking, okay? This is critical thinking. So identify a problem, all right? Identify a problem. All right, check your classmates' posts and comment on them. How do you feel about their problems? Is this critical or creative? Okay, all right, very good. So like everybody said in the chat, again, we've got an example of critical thinking. Well done, everybody. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Okay, good. Day 3. So day 3, we've got, can you help your classmates by suggesting a solution to their problems? Critical or creative? Somebody says possibly creative. Both? Yeah, okay, interesting. All right, good, good, good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go with the majority here. Now, remember, there's always a bit of crossover. Okay, there's always a bit of crossover. These C's, critical, creative, also collaboration, communication, they do intersect. Okay, so I'm going to say this is more creative. All right, because we are suggesting a solution. All right, we're suggesting a solution. So we could consider that this is creative. And then finally, finish your presentation and give your presentation. I'm going to tell you that this is both, okay? This is going to be both here at the end. It's because you're going to have to analyze what information you want to put into your presentation, assess all of the different information, and then you will actually have to come up with your presentation. So there's going to be an element of creativity in that. All right, thank you very much, everybody. So here you have the full description of the project. I'm not going to go through it because, as I said, it'll be available on the slides. If you are interested in developing more creativity in the English language classroom, this is by far the best thing you could read. Okay, so this is recommended further reading. I think it's about 160 pages of ideas. So yeah, you'll need a few days off to get through those. Maybe mark it as your summer holiday reading. Okay, the link to this booklet is in the Explore Further section at the end. Okay, so we've looked at how these creativity and critical thinking intersect, but let's come back now to looking more specifically at critical thinking and thinking about it in the EFL classroom. So basically, I'm going to start off by thinking about your older learners. Now, obviously, we've already seen an example of project-based learning type activity. Feel free to do that with your learners. It's fantastic. Okay, just take it off the shelf and do it. But a few other practical things. What does critical thinking look like in the EFL classroom? Well, it could be something like this. What would you do if type activity? Yeah, or what would you do if? So you could give students a role, a circumstance, a change, yeah, and ask them what would they do in these circumstances. It could be a simple debate, like a pros and a cons, town, countryside, shower, bath, noodles, rice, okay? Remember, always not about their feelings. It's not simply, I like rice, I don't like noodles. It's not about preference, okay? So you have to keep in mind analysis, assessment, evidence, okay? No bias, no prejudice, no judgment. You have to keep those rules very clearly in mind when you do these tasks. But any of these tasks would practice those skills. Okay, fact or opinion. Cardiff is the capital of Wales. That's where I am now. Remember the thinking cap, the Wales National Day. Okay, Cardiff is the best city in the UK. Now, I might think that, but sadly, it's not a fact. Okay, so very, very simple things like this. And you might want to do a short story, yeah, some follow-up questions, peer questions, guess the ending type scenarios. You might want to do something around similarities and differences, music stars and film stars, dogs and cats, geography and history as subjects in school, yeah? And I'm going to show you a technique in a moment called double bubble for how you can help your students to organize their thoughts, okay, to collate their critical thinking. So the really important thing here is evidence, yeah? So all of these things have to be based, all of these thoughts are higher order thoughts. You're going to tell your students they're doing critical thinking activities. You're going to show them the rules. You're going to explain to them what critical thinking is and what it isn't, okay? And you're going to tell them that when they're doing any of these relatively fun, playful, remember, because we want to keep it playful activities, then they have to have evidence. All right, so this is really a key here. Just a second, I'll just have a quick look at the chat. Okay, brilliant. And just before I move on, I would also like to mention here about how naturally critical thinking skills can sit in an EFL classroom. Because if we look at any of these bubbles, squarey bubbles, you can see how well they lend themselves to the EFL classroom in terms of things like introducing lexical sets. So let's imagine noodles versus rice. Okay, so this will sit very, very naturally in a lesson about food, maybe even targeting your lower level learners. So one of the things that people often ask is, can critical thinking be done with lower level learners? Well, yes, aspects of it can be done with lower level learners. Okay, you will need to pre-teach some vocabulary, but you can kickstart, you can spark, you can ignite the critical thinking process within learners of English who don't have necessarily all of the English language to express it. All of the grammar opportunities that you have here. What would you do if? Yeah. Wonderful opportunity for practicing conditionals, similarities and differences, comparatives, superlatives. Okay, you're teaching that kind of grammar point. So actually teaching critical thinking skills fits very naturally and very easily within the EFL classroom, because it's really quite possible to develop all sorts of, or adapt all sorts of units from course books, all sorts of topics, and integrate little aspects of critical thinking quite easily into them. All right. Okay, I mentioned double bubble. So double bubble is just a little technique that's sort of a mind map, basically, that you might want to give your students to help them to collate their thoughts. Okay, so basically you have similarities in the middle and differences on the edge. So here we've got teaching adults and children. Okay, so you could just copy something like that and give it out to your students so that it helps them with their note taking. It helps them to organize their thoughts to be able to then present them back to the class. Okay, I'm very well aware that time is ticking on and I still have a few things that I'd like to get through. So I just want to briefly mention critical thinking for younger learners. Okay, so perhaps now we're thinking more about your primary school learners. So it is definitely possible to do some critical thinking with them. Now, it isn't exactly clear whether or not they have all the circuitry in place at that age to really think critically. Okay, so we're not going to be doing debates. Okay, but we can do some very, very nice playful things, which again start to spark those connections within their developing brains. Okay, so this could be things like ordering games, could be things like sorting games. Imagine your dinosaurs. Yeah, which dinosaurs can fly, which dinosaurs can run, which dinosaurs eat plants, which dinosaurs eat meat, okay? Which dinosaurs are dangerous or most dangerous. So you're getting them to sort things into different sets, okay? So this is kickstarting the process at a very, very early stage of critical thinking. Putting anything into order is also doing the same, and anything around comparing. So remember, we already looked at the idea of introducing comparing, contrasting, yeah, to the sort of older learners. So comparing games, I put here Mickey and Minnie. This could be any characters that kids really, really like. Yeah, ask them to compare, but always try to ask them why. Okay, so you do not, even with the very young learners, I like Mickey because he's purple. Yeah, or why do you like purple? Yeah, this starts to touch on what we call the Socratic method. Now, I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail. There is a link to it in Explore Further. So Socratic method is where you answer every question with another question. Why? So this is was invented by Socrates, who is a philosopher. Perhaps that name rings a bit of a bell. Again, information about that in Explore Further. But the Socratic method could actually work very, very nicely with younger learners. Yeah. So you constantly, every time they give you an explanation, you ask them why. All right. And also here we have a game called Guess Who, which is really popular in the UK. I imagine you probably have versions of it as well in your countries where kids have to ask each other questions to try to figure out which character they've got on their card. This is an amazing game for the English language classroom, if you can get your hands on it, because it practices things like items of clothing, accessories, very basic language, male, female. You can play it almost from A1 level. So this is great. Okay, a couple of top tips now. So very, very well aware of the time. The main thing with critical thinking is that you make it easy on your students and on yourself. So I'm going to give you a few tips here. If you have a student that finds it really difficult to think critically, get them to imagine themselves in the shoes of someone else, because often it's much easier to think critically. We're not often very comfortable, maybe think, I don't want to say, or you don't have confidence in your own opinion. Whereas if you tell them, maybe imagine your future self, imagine yourself in 20 years, what would you say then? What would you think then? Suddenly people become more confident because it's them, but it's not them. Also putting themselves in the shoes of somebody else. Okay, so and in the post-webinar challenge, I've got a town hall circle task for you to try, which imagines just that, assigning roles and asking people what would they do if they were the town mayor? What would they do if they were a mother of 4 children, even though they might be a boy? Okay, so asking them to put themselves in the shoes of others. Okay, give everyone time and set micro tasks. So you will never have a lesson that is critical thinking. Today, we are all going to critically think, okay? And this also ties into my next point. Often when they ask people in studies, when do you have your best thoughts? When do you think most critically? It's very rare that people actually do that when somebody tells them, think critically now. Okay? Very, very, very unusual for people to really have quality critical thinking thoughts, because it's a process. It involves analyzing, it involves assessing evidence. Yeah, it's not something that you can just come up with on the spot. Okay, so you need to give people time. This could be years, yeah? This could be minutes for some people. But by setting these little micro tasks along the way, maybe interjecting a little bit of critical thinking into all your lessons, peppering it through, then you will be able to help your students gradually over time develop their skills. And you can also support them. So this is where we touch on inclusivity and accessibility. You can use a platform, and I'm going to make a plug here, shameless plug for our course Padlet. Okay, so by introducing maybe an asynchronous digital tool where that can be moderated, because we have to remember safeguarding. Okay, we have to remember that we have a duty to safeguard our younger learners, so we must not use platforms like WhatsApp. All right, because WhatsApp can't be moderated. We mustn't use platforms like Telegram because it can't be moderated. You should do this with a platform that you can check as a teacher to make sure that all of the safeguarding rules are in place. Okay, but this will give people an opportunity to think about it in their own time, whenever their inspiration strikes them, in the shower, cooking dinner, whatever, and then put their thoughts into an asynchronous platform. Also, some people may prefer to write their thoughts. Other people might prefer to speak their thoughts, yeah? We have to cater here to all different sorts of learning and communication styles. And you can also do this in a kind of flipped learning way. So I recommend that you look back at one of Susie's webinars about flipped learning. I believe it was planning lessons and courses, where you get the students to do a task before they come to the classroom. Okay, so this is like a kind of homework. And if you haven't joined our Padlet yet, there's the link. Okay, UN Sustainable Development Goals. I am literally going to touch on this today because it is a massive amount of information. I hope you know that the United Nations has identified 17 Sustainable Development Goals that they consider are relevant goals for us to all enjoy a healthy, prosperous future as a planet. Okay, these provide a wonderful opportunity for critical thinking in the classroom. They will give you lots and lots of suggestions for topics that you might want to use. And also you might want to have a look. Oh, I think I've gone too far there. Okay, sorry, one moment. Aha, there we are. I really, really suggest that you take a look at another publication by the British Council. The British Council is extremely generous in the amount of resources that they give us. Do have a look at this. I think this is well over 200 pages of things that you can do, actual lessons that you can do with your own students based on the Sustainable Development Goals. We use these all the time. Probably my favorite one, I think, is number 1, which is simply cut out a list of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and ask your students to prioritize them according to what they think would be priorities for their own country or their own area. So out of the box, out of the gate, we've got ordering, we've got numbering. Okay, remember, we could even start to do these kinds of ordering activities even with very young learners, and they have to say why they think that, why it's important for their local area, why no poverty might be more important for their area than zero hunger, for example. And they're also asked to talk about, reorder them, so it's a very visual task, and talk about how they intersect. Because none of these things exist in isolation. None of the 4 C's exist in isolation, and none of the UN Sustainable Development Goals exist in isolation. They all overlap, okay? So you will also have the opportunity to talk to them about how these goals fit together, okay? So it's really, that's just one of many activities that you can do with your learners. Okay, and just before we start to wrap up, we do need to talk about your role as a teacher. Okay, the teacher's role in the critical thinking in a classroom is extremely important, because you are responsible for setting an atmosphere, a culture of positivity and collaboration. Okay, and 4 features of a positive classroom would be a classroom that's respectful, safe, non-judgmental, and encouraging. Okay, so non-judgmental. This is a really important word here. So how do you do that? Well, for me, the key thing is that you have to see yourself as an umpire or a referee and not a player. So this is a kind of game. Remember, we're keeping it playful, okay? But you are not playing the game. You are facilitating. You are the umpire. So think about what an umpire does in a game of tennis or a game of football, or I'm not a very sporty person, but you know, I think most of us have a good sense of what an umpire is. Okay, they are not playing. So that has to be really your role in that. But you also need to be able to set the rules of the game collaboratively. We've got another C overlapping now in our classroom. So this is really starting to border on another important C, which is classroom and classroom management. Highly recommend going back and having a look at also Susie's webinar on classroom management, and also Anna's webinar on inclusive practices and creating inclusive environments in your classroom. So simple way of doing this, classroom contract, but do it collaboratively, okay? Get the students to write their own rules. So this is a real one. This was taken from a layer. The students write their own rules. So it's not you. Remember, you're an umpire. You're just a facilitator. Yeah, you're not saying, these are my rules, you have to stick to them. No, you're saying, come up with your own rules, because when you come up with your own rules, you're much more likely to stick to them than when somebody, a power that be, tells you to. And this also has critical thinking involved in it. Yeah, so they're thinking about why they have to be kind, why they have to work as a team, what are the benefits. So you've got critical thinking embedded there as well. You get them to sign that classroom contract that they wrote themselves, and then you display it. If you're in an online setting, this actually I think is from an online classroom, but we also do it physically. So you put it on a poster, they all sign it, stick it on the wall, and then every time somebody breaks that rule, you say, excuse me, Arik, you know, Arik, that wasn't very kind, and actually that was you that said we should be kind. Okay, and so, oh right, okay. And again, thinking about classroom management there. All right. Whew, we are nearly at the end, a whistle-stop tour indeed. So my final tips for critical thinking are, first of all, try to keep your atmosphere playful and collaborative, okay? Try to keep it playful and collaborative. Choose your topics wisely. Now, we haven't really gone into topic selection in this webinar simply due to lack of time, but I would really recommend, if you're not going to go for something pre-prescribed like sustainable development goals, choose your topics wisely. Now, in the UK, it would be very taboo, for example, to have to ask people to talk about religion or politics. Okay, so think about things that are taboo in your country and in your context. You remember, we want to create a positive, collaborative classroom, safe, non-judgmental. Okay, so you don't want to be introducing topics that are too controversial. Think about things that affect all of us, everywhere in the world, environment, health, these kinds of topics. All right. Set clear boundaries. Yeah, so try to make sure. So remember, critical thinking is in the box thinking. It's convergent, it's not divergent. Okay, so you can set rules, you can set limits. Take the little and often approach. Very difficult to assess critical thinking. How can you assess somebody's thoughts? How can you assess when somebody is thinking more critically than they were yesterday? But if you do micro tasks and take the little and often approach, you won't be overwhelmed, and neither will your students. Okay, summarize and review things regularly. All right, so if you've looked at critical thinking in the previous lesson, tell your students, right, we were critically thinking and this is what we did and these are the conclusions that we took. And last but not least, work on your own critical thinking, because like anything, in order to teach something, you need to know it pretty well yourself first. All right. Okay, everybody, I've got a post-webinar challenge for you. I'm not going to go through that now. It's going to be on my Padlet, okay? And also, last of all, we have this section, again, taken from the British Council Professional Development Framework, which is directly relevant to the topic that I've just been discussing today. If you would like to know more about Peartree, if you'd like to follow us, please click this QR code now. We love to keep in touch with you. We're very, very interactive. We're very responsive. You can send us a message on any of the social media and we will always try our best to get back to you. Okay, so if you've got your phone with you, quick, snap, take a picture of that now and add us on social media. Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to stop sharing now. I haven't been really keeping much of an eye on the, well, any eye on the Q&A. So I'm going to ask John to come back in, my colleague John. Thank you very much.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for the excellent webinar. Lots of things to think about there, critically or creatively. So some really interesting questions that came up in the Q&A actually. So the first one was from somebody called Sylvan Aaron, and Sylvan's question was: is an open mind a part of critical thinking or vice versa?
Woo! Is an open mind part of critical thinking or
is critical thinking a part of an open mind?
I would say they are definitely two sides of the same coin. I mean, in order to be able to think critically, you need to have an open mind. And usually, if you're an open-minded person, you're more predisposed to critical thinking, because that's the way your mind thinks. Yeah. So this is all about like creating connections in your brain. We are English language teachers, John and I. We see each other every day, in the face-to-face world as well. English language teaching is what we do. We're not neuro scientists, but I do know that this is about creating connections and pathways within our brains. And it's all about brain. It's a kind of brain training, right? So the more open-minded you are, the more you're likely to think critically, and then you'll get into kind of a positive cycle. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? That it's not always most effective to see these things as two separate kind of processes or tracks, because they really feed into each other in a constant cycle, right?
And actually, Sylvan, was it Sylvan, John?
It was Sylvan, yes.
Yeah. So Sylvan is just exactly said that in their own words in the chat. So you increase one and you increase the other. Interesting. Yeah. So it's
absolutely
kind of
Sylvan. Yeah.
a loop. Yeah.
Another really interesting question. This was from an anonymous contributor. Is thinking an imaginative activity or not? And to what extent are creative thinking and critical thinking different from each other in terms of imagination?
So imagination is a creative thinking skill, if we look at it in a purist definition. Yeah. So in the purist definition, imagination is very much sitting within the realm of creative thinking, not critical thinking, because in fact, in critical thinking, we're not imagining, we're doing the exact opposite. We're looking at evidence, things that are we're able to actually evidence in front of us, not things that we kind of invent. So in that sense, imagination would be part of creative thinking. However, as we've seen, in the real world, the usual kind of blocking method or the blocking kind of way is, you think critically, then you have a creative solution. You think critically, you have a creative solution. We could kind of sort of see it like that, and I illustrated that with the old Dragon's Den, and we saw it as well in our Alea project. And that's generally sort of the way it goes. But yeah, there is a lot of overlap here. But imagining something is creative thinking.
That's great. Thank you very much. Just a couple of very practical questions for Eric, actually, that came up in the Q&A box. Number one, just to confirm, will certificates be available after the session?
It will be shared after this first session, and then there will be another certificate for the second session, which will be shared after the session as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eric. And one more, will recordings be available of all the sessions from these webinars?
Well, I guess so. Yeah, it will be available and it will be shared, by British Council.
Perfect. Thank you very much. One final question for Nikki. Just because I'm very interested. Generally speaking, how have your learners responded to your inclusion of critical thinking activities in classes?
Well, I mean, our entire summer school program is based around creative and critical thinking. So every single lesson, that is the core aim of the lesson. So it isn't to teach a grammar point or a lexical set. It is specifically to teach one of those skills. So we base our entire junior summer program. So remember, juniors, I think I mentioned, we're talking about 12 to 17-year-olds. So just to be sort of specific, we wrote a curriculum based on the based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we make as a goal of every single one of those sessions an outcome of critical or creative thinking. So how does it go down? Well, extremely well, because young people are curious, and then the younger people are playful. And if we can introduce playful elements to the sort of curious teenagers, it's just a game changer, really. And it is always very, very well received. And I'm always delighted by, when we ask them to do a presentation, how much effort they put into it, how much energy, and also the quality of what they come up with. So I think sometimes we underestimate how much teenagers can contribute, because Yeah, and I think that it's often, you know, I've had ideas and thoughts and things sparked in my own mind by our teenagers when we give them the opportunity to creatively and critically think and come up with ideas and solutions. You know, I say to myself, wow, this is better than any, you know, productivity podcast I've ever listened to. So make sure
if
you
only
give
these
that
people
chance.
were running the world.
If only they were running the world. Make sure you give the chance to your teenagers to have that opportunity to do it. You'll be surprised what they come up with. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Nikki. That was fascinating.
Great. Thanks, John. Okay.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for the informative and insightful presentation. Thank you also to John. Everyone, that concludes our first session today on developing critical thinking. However, please be informed that we have another session about developing reflective practice starting in 15 minutes. So please stay here. Don't move anywhere. Don't leave the session because we will use the same link, yeah, the same room, and those who are on Facebook, you can just stay because it will be restreamed again in 15 minutes, yeah. So to claim your certificate, don't forget to fill out the feedback form. It's on your screen. You can scan it or type down the link on your browser, and then you can claim your certificate after that. Thank you very much for your participations, everyone, and see you all in 15 minutes. Bye.
Okay, we are going to start the session soon. So hopefully everyone is already back from the break. While we are waiting, hang on, let me just move it closer a little bit. There we go. All right, so it's already 3:15. I guess we are going to start the second session now. Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who already joined the first session, thank you very much for staying with us. I can see there are still many participants joining the second session, and hopefully there will be many more joining. And for those of you who just joined the session of 21st Century English Teacher Express webinar series, welcome to this webinar. And also greetings here from Jakarta, Indonesia. Good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening, wherever you guys live. So right now, I think I'm just going to start the second webinar. So this webinar is going to be about how to develop a reflective practice. I would also like to say hello to everyone streaming on Facebook, British Council Teaching English Asia Facebook page. Thank you very much for coming and also staying with us right here. And before we start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Lulu. I'm one of the teachers here in English Academy by Ruang Guru, and I will be the moderator for this second session. So the topic of reflective practice, this session will look at reflective practice and the many ways in which it can be a vital part of a teacher's personal and also professional toolkit. We will try to unpack some of the theory underlying the concept of reflection and also highlighting how teachers are already reflective practitioners and also discussing the importance of making this a core part of what we do. And continuing with the theme of practice, we will then explore real-life ideas for becoming a more effective reflective practitioner. And throughout the webinar, we will also consider the many benefits this approach can bring to the classroom and how making a reflection an interactive process involving both teachers and learners can help unlock its transformative power. And this session is going to be delivered of our second speaker. Right here, we have John Letson. So he is the academic manager of Peartree Languages. Now in his second decade in English language education, John has worked enthusiastically with learners and teachers from a diverse range of backgrounds around the world within a variety of contexts, institutions, and also courses. So giving him a broad perspective and also on the sociocultural factors that shape language learning in both online and face-to-face contexts. He was most recently a senior tutor and moderator on both Perlim 2 and the UK-Indonesia Digital Innovation Project Nusantara Go. John also holds a degree in French and also Japanese, as well as a master's degree in applied linguistics. His areas of specialist interest include academic English, teacher training and mentoring, online communities of practice, English for the workplace, and English for everyday communities. English for everyday communications, and he is particularly keen on supporting students with functional grammar and natural pronunciation skills. Away from the teaching world, John is also a proof editor and spend as much as time as he can be to play bass guitar. Ooh, this is very impressive. So now I think without further ado, everyone is already looking at him. So everyone, please welcome our second speaker of today's session, Mr. John Letson. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lulu. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to have you here. Welcome to everybody on Facebook as well. As Nikki said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be at the moment. And whether you're watching this synchronously with us at the moment, welcome, or asynchronously a little bit later on the YouTube channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm not really going to say anything else about myself because we've said far too much already, other than to say, I'm John, nice to have you here. Hopefully this will be useful next kind of 45 minutes or so. So I'm just going to share my screen now. One moment. Never click the right button when you want to. Sorry, one moment. Perfect. Okay, so as we've established, I'm John, and today's webinar will be on developing reflective practice. So how does this fit into the British Council's CPD framework for teachers? Mostly, it fits into this area here, which is taking responsibility for professional development. So developing reflective practice is a key element of that. But words that Nikki mentioned a lot and very important here, because there is a great deal of crossover and overlap in terms of what Nikki just talked about and what we're going to look at today. A bit of crossover here because developing reflective practice involves a lot of elements of particularly critical thinking, but also creative thinking and some other kind of 21st century skills, which we'll talk about as we go on. So to give you guys a quick overview, and it will be quick, I promise, because there's a lot of practical ideas I'd like to get to today, because something as kind of nebulous as the phrase reflective practice can seem a bit, well, nebulous. So I want to try and show you that there are lots of practical ideas here to make your life easier as a teacher, right? And hopefully to make life more interesting and engaging for your learners as well. So in terms of an overview here, then I've actually used a framework for recording reflection, so kind of developing reflective practice I really like. It's called the What, So What, Now What framework. So I've used this to kind of inform the development of this webinar as well. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at reflection. What is it? Right, what is reflection? Because that's a trickier question than it sounds, particularly if you ask any two academics. You probably will not get the same answer on that. So we'll just try and look at a little bit at what reflection might be. Okay, so having considered that, what is reflective practice then? What do we mean by adding the word practice to this phrase? Is there a distinction, a difference, important or not? So what? Okay, well, why practice reflection then? If we're talking about reflective practice, what's the point? Why is that useful? Why would that help? And why teachers and learners? Okay, so I'm really trying to come at this from a very practical point of view today, because I'm a working teacher, just like I'm sure most of you here. Real-time pressures, real classes, real learners, real getting hungry before most of my classes. Actually, I'm hungry most of the time. That's something that I have reflected on and tried to develop strategies to mitigate. So yeah, absolutely. Why is it important for teachers and learners? In my experience, any aspect of the kind of teaching learning paradigm really has to be a symbiosis. It's a constant kind of circular process which has to involve teachers and learners. So we'll look at how we can do that effectively, also to help develop the learner's own kind of thinking skills, inner lives, as part of that process. And then we go on to now what? Okay, so having looked at what reflection, reflective practice are, why are we bothering? Okay, well then how can we do this? And this is the practical aspect of today's webinar. So that's something I'd like to try and hit pretty hard if we can, because there's a lot of practical ideas in there for you, so to hopefully make this a little bit more concrete than abstract. There will be a little bit of theory, of course, but I'm going to tread quite lightly on that and use it more as a kind of background why to what we're doing than a main focus. But first, happy St. David's Day, everyone. As Nikki mentioned, today is the National Day of Wales, our small country in the kind of southwest of the UK. St. David is our patron saint. So if you were to go to Wales today, you might see lots of very cute little kids wearing traditional Welsh costumes. You'd probably see lots of dragons, plenty of leeks, and loads of daffodils. And if you went to Cardiff, which is our capital city, that's Queen Street there, I think, which is one of the main streets in the city centre, you might see people parading down the street with lots of dragon flags. So happy St. David's Day. Dydd Gwyl Dewi, hapus I chi gyd. One moment though. We've talked about reflection. So hopefully not in a gimmicky way, I think it might be useful to take a moment to reflect. Maybe a minute. Now, there's a reason I'm doing this. It will hopefully become clearer towards the end of the webinar, but I'd like you to just take a second, look around. Take a breath, maybe two. I mean, hopefully you'll continue to take many breaths from this point, but a deep breath. And just have a look around you. See if you've got a pen and paper, a mobile phone that you can take kind of notes or memo on, keyboard attached to some type of dock that you can type on. That would be great. And I'd like you to just consider this question, okay? Reflective practice. What comes to your mind? Okay, so if you could just take 1 minute and write down whatever comes to your mind in any form that feels natural to you, right? Bullet points, prose, poetry, song lyrics, whatever feels good. If you could just take 1 minute and just write down whatever comes to your mind when you consider the phrase reflective practice. Okay, I'll just sit quietly here for 1 minute and try not to be a distraction. So 1 minute, please. What comes to your mind? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. That's around a minute, maybe slightly under, but hopefully next time we can take slightly longer. If you'd like to as well, if you'd like to share some of your ideas, now obviously reflection by its nature can be a very personal thing, so if you prefer to keep your reflections for yourself, that's absolutely fine. But if you would like to share some of the ideas that you wrote down in the chat, that would be great. Really appreciate that. Okay. So having taken a moment to stop and reflect, what is reflection then? Just a small question. What is reflection? As I mentioned before, I think it is important to highlight at this point that if you asked any two teachers, any two learners, and most definitely any two academics this question, you would probably get two very different answers. So what I'm not going to do here is to try and give you a perfect definition of reflection, right? Or even to claim that one exists, because there's a huge amount of debate about what this term actually means. But what I am going to try and do is show you some aspects of reflection that most people would agree that reflection involves, right? So there's a very good quote here from somebody called Marc Claret, who's a researcher in this area. Just a note on kind of the theory. A lot of this theory is based on the work of somebody called John Dewey, who was very active in the 1930s, developing ideas around reflection and its importance, particularly in terms of kind of teaching and learning. So if you'd like a deeper dive into that, I do have a lot of references that you could use in my bibliography at the end there. But Marc Claret, a more recent thinker, said that reflection is common real thinking, a process which gives coherence to a situation which is initially incoherent. It's a descriptive notion, not a prescriptive one. Okay, a couple of really important points there, I think. This one reason I really like this quote. It's real thinking. As Nikki mentioned, critical thinking is a part of our everyday thoughtscape, mindscape. So is reflection. It's just what our brains do. So considering reflection and reflective practice, maybe from a slightly more pedagogical point of view, it isn't trying to teach anybody new tricks. It's more of a framework to describe what we already do, and maybe to introduce an element of structure and discipline to that once we get onto the practice side of things. But we're not reinventing the wheel. This is what our brains already do to a greater or lesser extent. So what is it? It's a way of thinking about ourselves and how or what we think and what we do. It's also a way of trying to understand ourselves, okay, how we think, what we do. So two kind of parallel tracks there, very much connected to each other. Getting a bit of distance from ourselves, a little bit meta, trying to think about ourselves, but also trying to understand our own thinking and why we take the actions we take. And as I just mentioned, it's a way of trying to just create a bit of distance from the self, right, in order to do these two things. So we'll look at some ways to structure your reflections to maybe help you do that effectively then. Okay, so that's what most people would agree reflection can involve, at least. Does that sound familiar? It probably does, because we're all already reflective beings. We have cognition, we have sentience, therefore, at some point, we reflect, right? I'm just going to give you a few very practical examples of reflection. Not reflective practice yet, but reflection. For example, you're teaching a class. From the point of view of a teacher, then you play a game of hot seat, right? Just maybe because your students are tired, or because it's the end of the day, or they're just not very engaged, and you think, okay, I'm going to whip out the hot seat. It's a classic. I do this a lot. And you find that, wow, actually the students were really into that. They remembered much more of the vocabulary than I expected. They were actually paying attention to their pronunciation. Oh, that's cool. Do you know what? Actually, yeah, I'm going to do this again tomorrow. Maybe we could use this actually as the review activity before our quiz at the end of the week. Okay, well, that's reflection in action, right? A personal example for me, anybody who knows me will know that this is absolutely true. Let's say it's nearly 12 o'clock. You have another class at 12 o'clock. You're feeling a little bit irritated, irritable, angry, maybe, could be. And you're thinking, how am I going to get through to 1 o'clock where I have my next 5-minute break? Okay, well, I wish I wasn't in such a bad mood. Your stomach rumbles. And now I'm hungry. I'm not going to be able to eat for another hour. Oh, this is a nightmare. I hope I don't throw somebody out the window. Wait a minute. Okay, yeah, hungry, bad mood, an hour till lunch. Ah, I'm hangry. Wait a minute. Yeah, this happens every week at the exact same time. I always want to throw somebody out the window in my 12 o'clock class. Right. Okay. Do you know what? I'm going to take my wife's advice. I'm going to put a bunch of snacks in my bag next time. I'm going to have one before my 12 o'clock class, and everything will be peaceful and educational instead of full of rage. Another quick example, maybe from the point of view of your learners, then. You may teach learners who are a bit more sporty, a bit more active, but maybe not always academically inclined, not always engaged. These learners, they may be part of a team, they may play sport individually, but they probably have coaches, right? Especially if they play at a higher level. A lot of what they do in terms of the coaching for sport will involve reflection, right? The coach will encourage them to reflect on weaknesses which may have allowed their opponents to score in the last game or even win the last game, and how to develop those areas of weakness so it doesn't happen again. Maybe even develop strategies to beat their opponent next time. That's reflection. It could be worth pointing that out to any more kind of active sporty students you have who aren't naturally very inclined towards academic thinking or academic study. You could even recruit them, get them on your team, help you to promote reflection, reflective practice in the class. More on that a little later. Okay, so we talked a little about what reflection is, or at least what it could involve. What is reflective practice then? Okay, well, there was a researcher called, I think it was called Julie Finley, who put together a really good paper trying to analyze what reflection and reflective practice, again, very problematic areas from an academic point of view, in terms of just agreeing on definitions. But she said that reflection is practitioners learning through and from experience towards gaining new insights of self and or practice, and being self-aware and critically evaluating their own responses to practice situations. The crossover that we mentioned during Nikki's webinar, right? There's a lot of critical analysis involved in reflection, getting some distance from what you thought, what you did, trying to analyze that critically, critical thinking, and then trying to feed that into maybe changes to your practice, so that you can make things work a bit more smoothly next time. Or important to remember, maybe to reflect on what you did or what you thought and think, actually, yeah, that was the right thing for this situation, right? So I don't want to change that. I'm going to do that again, like the hot seat game. So it's important to remember reflection is not always, and reflective practice is not always about highlighting where you're going wrong. It can also be about highlighting where you're going right and making sure you don't change that, as well as making changes where you think they could be necessary. So practice. Something systematic, something routine, habitual, right? Procedural meaning in this context with steps, clear steps that can be followed to help you achieve this, and with goals attached to it. We'll talk about the importance of that a little bit later. So it's something that creates a kind of cycle, if you can do it like that. We'll talk about that more a little later. Maybe useful at this point then, just to compare and contrast our ideas of reflection and reflective practice. So reflection, what are we doing? We're critically analyzing or evaluating past events. We're thinking about the actions, the emotions as well, reactions, responses connected to those situations or events. And hopefully that's going to give us new insights, right? It's going to add to our knowledge about ourselves and ourselves in the context of these situations. And it's hopefully going to give us a better understanding of ourselves and of our role in these types of situations. How does that compare to reflective practice then? Reflective practice is continual reflection, okay? So it's this cycle I just talked about. But it's also using these new insights to inform ongoing and future practice, okay? In both a positive direction and in terms of the direction of maybe things which you'd like to change. That then in turn will lead to new experiences, which can then be reflected on. It's a wheel, right? A little bit more on that later, but that's essentially the difference. A reflection is describing a kind of mental cognitive process which happens in our brain. Reflective practice is describing how this can become continual and then feed into steps of a process with goals. Hopefully the goals make your life easier as a teacher or as a human. Okay, well, where can this critical analysis or critical evaluation come from? It can come from your students. Very important there. You can ask your students for feedback on what you're doing in the lessons, type of activities you're doing, the type of language you're looking at, the games you're playing, you know, whether they like the groups they're in. It's really important to engage students in this process of reflection as well. It can come from your colleagues too. Could be something informal, just like a chat after a lesson. Could be informal, maybe peer observation programs, communities of practice, or more formal, maybe peer observation programs set up maybe by your academic manager, director of studies, head of department, anything like that. Of course, reflection being a very personal process, all to do with your own kind of cognition and awareness of self and world. Absolutely, a lot of this will come from your own personal experience. Now, do I hear a few groans there? Yes, also theory and research. Okay, now how deeply you dive into that is entirely up to you, but it is very useful to look at theory and research in this area if you would like some new insights and ideas into ways to practice reflectively, or why you should practice reflection. Okay, so not as an end in itself, but as something, again, just to inform your reflection, to make your life easier, right? To make teaching easier, to make learning more fun for your students. That's the goals, right? I think they are for most of us. Okay, so moving on then, why would we say that reflective practice is important for teachers? So we come to the so what element of this webinar then. Well, it can help you become an even better teacher because you can get this distance, right? Like we mentioned, you can step back, you can maybe focus on individual elements of your whole teaching practice. For example, if you take the time to step back, think, and record your reflection as well, we'll talk about that. Very important to do that, and we'll explain why in a moment. I'm sure you can guess anyway. Then you can look at individual elements of your practice, which you can't do easily in the moment in class, because you're trying to do 100 different things. You're trying to monitor, you're trying to vary your interaction patterns, you're trying to make sure that the students are engaged, are not sleeping, fighting, whatever it is. It's difficult to look at these components of your whole practice, like your pronunciation work, for example. Am I modeling this in a useful way? Should I maybe do a bit more about syllable stress, something like that? But you can get a bit of distance and look at your learner's response, and then maybe think about individual elements of your practice you could change or keep the same. To help you to grow professionally, can be hard to think about this, to ask ourselves, uncomfortable questions, but knowing your strengths and where you're weaker, it can make you more confident, right? More well-rounded, more motivated. That makes teaching easier, because if you feel confident, your students sense that, they get more confident. The whole learning environment becomes a lot more fun, a lot more comfortable, a lot safer, and willingness to communicate usually increases then. Okay, so confident teachers, confident learners, self-reflection is a vital aspect of that, because it helps you to understand yourself. It can also help you to become an innovator, right? It's problem solving as well. Reflection can lead to problem solving, because you establish where there may be some issues by taking a bit of distance and thinking about things a little bit. In order to solve problems, sometimes you have to, as Nikki mentioned, think outside the box, right? Think a bit critically and creatively, okay, in this kind of feedback loop that we talked about. And that can help you then self-direct to maybe new techniques, methodologies, apps, platforms. That feeds back into what I just mentioned about use the literature, right? Use the theory, use the research to help inform this practice, not as an end in itself. Nobody has time for that unless they're very academically minded. Use it to help you to achieve your goals. And again, a very practical point as a teacher and as an observer. If you think reflectively as a practice, if you develop this cycle, you're going to be better prepared for professional checkpoints, right? Things like official observations, dun, 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 inspections. Right, you're not going to be scrabbling around for new ideas or last minute fixes 2 hours before your official observation, day before your inspection. You're going to be doing this as part of a habit anyway. You're not going to need to do anything differently, because you already do this. You already think about your strengths and weaknesses. You already think about what you're doing you don't want to change, what you might want to change, how to do it. So these professional checkpoints, they're just another part of your usual reflective loop. So no stress, right? Make your life easier. Okay, moving on then, I mentioned that I was trying to look at this from the point of view of learners as well as teachers. So, well, why is it important for learners? Because you really do need to think about that, rather than just saying, oh, they really should reflect because it's in the 21st century skills. Well, why? Because if you collect feedback from your students, in any way, it could be live feedback, it could be after the fact. We'll look at some ways you can do that afterwards. You're moving further towards student-centered learning, right? That always, in my experience, improves engagement, improves rapport between the teacher and the learners and the other learners, and improves confidence. Confidence on the teacher's part. Yeah, okay, actually, they're into this. They like it. They gave me positive feedback on that. Awesome, we'll do it again. Or, okay, yeah, actually, I get that they didn't enjoy that so much, or they weren't so engaged, and I get why now. Oh, okay, that's great. I can avoid that way in the future then. So everybody's going to feel more confident. Everybody's going to feel more comfortable. Your students are going to feel very present in the learning process and very valued, right? And that's better for everyone. Help learners to develop autonomy, motivation, creativity, all crucial elements of the 21st century skills Nikki mentioned earlier. And we looked at in terms of the CPD framework from the British Council. Can also help prepare learners for life, work, and civic engagement as local and global citizens. Yeah, key aspect of 21st century skills development as well. Reflection can help you understand yourself. If you can understand yourself, then that is also going to help you to understand other people other contexts, to see yourself in different contexts. That can help you to, as Nikki mentioned, put yourself in other people's shoes, right? And imagine other contexts from other perspectives. This can help you to become a much better local citizen, global citizen, help create a much fairer, more productive, more enjoyable society, right? Also can help you to develop better awareness of themselves and others. For students, we mentioned that. But the soft skills aspect is important too. I hate that phrase, soft skills. It makes it sound like they're not important. They're super important, because if we can't communicate with each other, we're just all going to end up eating each other, really. And the fact we haven't so far really owes a lot to our development of complex communication skills as human beings, human societies. So these soft skills, things like developing the ability to be patient, managing discourse, are vital to communication. Reflection can help build those. Reflective practice even more so. It can also help to develop counterfactual thinking. What do we mean by that? Well, just imagining situations which are not real, or were not real, or will not be real. Okay, it's creative, it's critical. As we mentioned earlier with Nikki's example, it's great for conditionals, unreal conditionals, second conditionals, third conditionals, mixed conditionals. Really good way to integrate critical thinking and language development, grammar skills and range. Okay, moving on. Well, why practice? Another good reason to practice is to avoid some pitfalls, right? And rabbit holes. What are we talking about here? Well, if you reflect without it being connected to any goals, okay, without it being connected to things you want to develop or maintain in the context of having thought about them and realized that they work or they're not working, then there's no tethering. Your reflection is not attached to anything. What can happen then? This is a dandelion. You may have the most insightful, the most beautifully articulated reflections ever, but if you don't record them, if you don't get them down in some way so that you can return to them later, they're gonna just off into the ether, like our beautiful dandelion here. So make the loop, make the cycle. It can help you to not to lose your valuable reflections. Okay, important as well, if you develop this as part of a habitual practice, you can avoid token reflection. What do I mean by that? Well, some guy with a beard in a British Council webinar told me it's good to reflect. Yeah, okay, well, I went to the webinar, so done. Now, I know it can feel like that when you're a busy teacher, but if you make this a practice, if you make this a habit, if you make this a constant wheel turning in your life, even if it's a small part of your life, you can avoid this being a token thing, which you just feel like you're doing because you have to, which it's never sustainable, right? If you feel like the pressures from outside, it's more the motivation coming from inside. Okay, you can reflect without learning. If you have no parameters, then you might not learn anything. It can just be simple as time parameters, right? So if I say for 30 minutes every Friday afternoon, I'm going to just reflect on my teaching week, maybe some specific events, specific things that happen. I'm just going to write down my reflections, show you how in a second. And I'm going to do that every week. Then I can learn from that. If I don't, my reflections could be pretty random, and I might end up going down rabbit holes into tangential thinking. Now, I love rabbit holes. I'm a sci-fi fan, so of course I love rabbit holes. But rabbit holes are not great when you are pressed for time and you're a working teacher. So having parameters to your reflection can help avoid rabbit holes. Very cute rabbits there, though. You'd kind of want to go there, wouldn't you? But don't. You don't have time. Okay, so also as well, real reflection can be hard, right? I mentioned earlier, it can involve asking ourselves uncomfortable questions. About ourselves, our practice, our personality, our reactions to things. But again, if you build habits, if this becomes training, you can accept that, okay, there's a bit of pain here, but I know there'll be gain at the end of it. That's the nature of training, right? Nikki mentioned future selves earlier. Watched a really interesting short documentary the other day. I think it was called Aligning with Your Future Self by a guy called Ari Wallach. It was on a free online channel called Big Think. I highly recommend the channel and the documentary if you got time to check it out. But it was all about just thinking about, okay, this might hurt now, but think about yourself in a week. in a month, in a year. Think how grateful you'll be to yourself that you did this now, right? So future John hopefully is going to say, okay, thanks for taking 30 minutes a week to reflect. I know it hurt, but I'm in a better place now. Thanks, past John. The other things we won't talk about. Okay, cool. So some models for reflection then. So moving on to the more kind of theoretical aspect of this then. Like I said, I am going to tread lightly here. It's more about giving you, as I mentioned, tying this to maybe reflective goals, okay? Giving you some templates to help your reflection become a practice, become this kind of wheel, right? Rather than just saying, okay, you really should read the literature and look at the models on this. Why? Well, okay, because they'll give you a template to make your life easier by helping you to reflect as part of your practice. Okay, so kind of the godfather of the godparent of reflective practice models. It's from Kolb, I think it was 1984. So Kolb first kind of presented it in this visual way as a circle, right? As a wheel of reflection. So you have a concrete experience, you reflect on that. You try and think more abstractly about that and conceptualize, what do we mean by that? You do your kind of critical analysis, critical evaluation of the situation, your thoughts, your actions connected to that situation. And then you try and draw some conclusions as well about, okay, what you might try differently next time then, or what you might keep the same, as I mentioned. And then you experiment, you try it, see what happens, right? Because you've got a record of reflection and hopefully some guidance from your own self-directed research connected to that to inform your next steps, your experimentation. And then that then feeds back into another concrete experience. It's a wheel, right? Why is that useful? Why do I keep saying wheel? Why is John obsessed with wheels? Well, as nature has hopefully taught us, wheels are extremely practical in design because once you get a bit of momentum, they mostly keep going by themselves, okay? There's a reason this isn't a reflective square, right? Or a reflective triangle in terms of this practice. It's a wheel because it just needs maybe a bit more of a push at the start to deal with the inertia, to get the momentum going. And then you just need a little bit of energy every week, for example, to keep the wheel turning, all right? So that wheel idea really is important from my point of view here. So then Gibbs developed Kolb's 1984 model. I think Gibbs was 1988. I think it was a book called Learning by Doing. It's just a development of Kolb's model, as you can see. I won't read through the entire model here, but it's just adding a few extra steps, okay, and just kind of concretizing what Kolb was talking about, which is maybe a little abstract initially, making it a little bit more practical for teachers and learners, right? Okay, so simple questions. What happened? What were you thinking and feeling? What was good and bad? What sense can you make of this? Why did this happen, right? What could the reasons be or have been? What do you need to improve on? I would add to that as well, as I mentioned, what do you need to keep the same? Because it's already working well. Okay, reflection goes in both directions. And okay, well, how will you improve, or how will you maintain what you're doing then? What are your concrete steps towards action there? Another model which I like was from Schoen. I think this particular iteration is from 1991. Schoen had been active around the same time in the 80s, kind of developing a slightly different approach to reflection, reflective practice. What I like about Schoen's model here is that it includes an element related to reflection in action, so kind of the live reflection, I guess we could say, as well as a post hoc, after the fact kind of reflection on action element, which is more what Kolb and Gibbs are talking about, I think. I like that because I'm very much a dogme teacher. So my natural style of teaching is very much reactive and adaptive to the learners in the room, what they're interested in, what they're trying to communicate, what they're trying to express, and then we kind of take it from there. So I like this model because it does include an element where I can think about not just after the fact, but what's happening in this moment, what's informing the decisions I'm making right now. Maybe to say, okay, do you know what? Let's stop the quiz. Let's play a game of hot seat. Okay, why did I decide to do that then? What were the kind of influential factors in that? And then that can feed into my after the fact reflection as well. So I quite like this model, but choose a model that works for you. Okay, so why did we look at these, and why is it important to have a model? I mentioned that recording reflection is really important. Why is recording reflection really important? Do you remember the dandelion? Because if we don't record it, it could be the best and most eloquently rendered reflective thoughts in the history of the world. No recording, they're gone. Okay, so we can use these models, Kolb, Gibbs, Schoen, others, if you'd like to delve into the research. Like I said, there's a long list of publications you could look at the end, if you're interested in a deeper dive. Why then should we do that? Look at these models, because these models can actually provide useful templates for our reflection. The scariest thing I write as well, the scariest thing to a writer, whether you're writing fiction or your own reflections, is a blank page. Okay, so don't have a blank page. You can use, for example, Gibbs's model to structure your reflection. Okay, so I've just adapted Gibbs's model a little bit here. I used a couple of other sources as well to make my own template for a reflective journal. Okay, which you could use every day, every week, however often you feel is realistic for you. These will be available, I think, on our Padlet. Make sure to check out our Padlet. So yeah, these should be available, I think, via a Google folder on our Padlet at some point, if you'd like to use any of these reflective journal templates. So here, using Gibbs's model, it just helps you to structure your reflection. I've got some question prompts here as well, so that can just help avoid, scary blank page syndrome by having these prompts here. I won't read them out, bore you by reading them out here, but it's based on Gibbs's model here, and the question prompts help you to just structure your reflection. Could be as long as short in amount as you like, as is useful for you. Okay. So another template that I put together. Why? Well, because it's Schoen, and I like Schoen because I'm a dogby teacher. This is a simple one. So this is based on Schoen's reflection in action, reflection on action model of reflective practice then. So here you may be able to record, if you take this on a piece of paper or on your phone or whatever into class with you, you may be able to actually record your reflections on an event or an experience that's happening, and you're thinking about it, your decision making, your action at the time. Now, that's very difficult in a real classroom environment, to be honest. So maybe we can admit that it's a slight misnomer here. If you can't do that, maybe as soon afterwards as possible, trying to think more about the moment, okay, how you were thinking, how you were feeling in the moment, rather than trying to get that distance yet, because you can then come back to that, and you can use the reflection on action element of the template here to think about, okay, well, post hoc then, what were the results of my actions, right? Did it make things better or worse? What would I do differently next time, or the same? And what new kind of knowledge or information have I gained since, maybe from my reading, maybe from my discussions with peers, maybe from feedback from my learners, or what am I still missing, right? What are the gaps I have in my knowledge or understanding or repertoire to address these new goals that I've got to improve things there. So I like the fact that the live element can feed into the asynchronous element of this reflection. So you could use that template if you like to. Okay, final one then. So I mentioned at the start of the webinar, I've informed the structure of this webinar with the what, so what, now what model. This one is a very simple one, and it's really good because it could be used very easily for learners. I've kind of adapted the question prompts here to make them pretty friendly to the EFL classroom, depending on your student's level and age, of course. So simple question prompts. What happened? Describe the details. So what? Why does it matter? Well, what have you learned? how do you feel about that? Right. Now what then? Okay, well, what am I going to do the same or differently next time? How am I going to use what I've learned to help me do that? Okay, what's my next step? Kolb's active experimentation, right? In a much more kind of distilled, simpler form. Dealing with the blank page in a friendly way. So there's just some ideas about how you can structure your own written, recorded reflection to avoid the dandelion. Okay, so I promised practical ideas for the classroom here. Hopefully that hasn't been too much theory, and hopefully I've tried to kind of align that with why it matters in the real world. Some ideas for the classroom here. Well, do you remember at the start of the webinar, I asked you to take a minute and just write down what came to your mind from your reflection on what reflective practice is. Well, this is a technique called the 1 minute paper. I really like this. I think it was originally developed for higher education, so for university students, but it's been adapted since for kind of like EFL context, younger learners as well. Language learning context in general, in fact. And it's just a really useful way, either and or all of it together, to help your students reflect, take a moment to reflect on what they're actually learning, just to be present in the process, and to get feedback from your students in a simple kind of non-pressured way. Okay, so you can give your students a piece of paper, or they can do it on their smartphones or screens or whatever, and you can just stop at the start of the class, in the middle of the class, at the end of the class, combination of all three, whenever you think is a useful time to stop and reflect on one aspect of what they've been learning, for example, or a method you've used, activity, game, anything like that, and you can ask them a specific question. I've got a few different types of prompts here. I won't read them out to you, but I'll show you what areas. You could use prompts about their interest. Okay, what do you remember was interesting? Prompts about the relevance, kind of hopefully prompting a little bit of critical thinking there. What was useful for you? Prompts about their opinions, simple but very effective, of course. Okay, well, what did you like in today's class? What didn't you like in today's class? Okay, a bit of analysis and critical thinking skills again. What do you think the aim was? Okay, I know that the British Council would usually advise you to put the aims on the board at the start of the class, and of course there's a sound rationale for that, but sometimes you might not want to, because you might want to engage your learners in the process of realizing what the aims are, or even better, co-constructing your aims with your learners if you can. Okay, conceptual connections as well, right? Transdisciplinary thinking, that's very important in 21st century skills. So these are question prompts to help you do that. Okay, so some practical classroom ideas for older learners, higher level learners. You could get them to write exit slips, similar to the 1 minute prompt idea. So exit slips, you put a post-it or piece of paper on their desk, and you use a question prompt, maybe one of your 1 minute question prompts at the end of the lesson, just for a minute or two, and then you ask them to leave it on their desk. If you want anonymous feedback, just to kind of create a corpus, then don't ask them to write their name. If you want specifically individual feedback as well, ask them to write their name too, for feedback on an activity or a game that you did, because then you can also build, and my colleague Anna mentioned the importance of kind of gathering data on your learners in her webinar last week. You can build a picture on individual differences, right? On individual motivations, willingness to communicate, things like that as well. So you can personalize things. You can make your learners feel more part of the process too. Take reflection breaks. Okay, could be to do a 1 minute paper, middle of the class, start of the class, end of the class, wherever you feel is appropriate. Stop, look around, take a breath. Sound familiar? But it doesn't have to be written. They could also reflect in pairs. They could reflect as part of a group discussion. That could then lead on to useful language development skills. You know, we mentioned, I mentioned in the chat before, language, functional language, giving opinions, disagreeing, agreeing, asking for opinions, things like that. All right. Incorporate redrafting into assessment. Okay, so that can be really useful as well. If you've got some type of written assessment, now you may not have control, I understand, over the assessment process and procedure, but if you do, especially if it's a more kind of informal, kind of summative, formative assessment rather than a summative assessment, then you could have a kind of mandatory forced reflection, but still presented in a positive way, drafting phase, which the students have to submit then get feedback from you, and then they have to reflect on that feedback and submit a final version. Then this is something that we did in the New Santara Go project that Nikki mentioned, and we've got lots of friends and colleagues from that project here today. Lovely to see you guys. Lovely to see everybody. We included a drafting stage in a bit of written reflective feedback, and hopefully that helped it become a bit more of a practice as opposed to just something you have to do because it's a diktat from on high. Model your own reflection as well. Show the students, your learners, show them your reflective journal. Be like, okay, I know I'm asking you to do this, but I do this too. And I don't just do it because I have to, I do it because it helps me, and hopefully it helps you, right? Also, I mentioned about maybe the more sporty or active students you may have, right? Speaking as a sportsman, mostly former sportsman myself. Yeah, use these students as reflection coaches. If you have learners who are involved in sport, maybe at a higher level or with coaches, they're used to reflection as part of development of strategies and goal setting. Okay, ask them to be reflection coaches. Set up teams in your class, and they can coach the other learners towards doing better in the next quiz, right? Trying to beat the other teams. Make it a competition in a friendly way. Prizes, motivation, okay? Reflection is a real life thing. It's not just something on a piece of paper. Okay, some ideas for lower level learners then as well. Well, you could use the traffic light system, and I have made my own traffic lights here. My art skills are legendarily bad, but there you go. I don't know if you can see this properly. Whoa, I'm not sure you can see my traffic light. Okay, wait, can you see my traffic light? Let me put it in front of my face. Yeah, there we go. That's my green traffic light. You could also have your amber traffic light, and you could have your red traffic light. A simple way for younger learners to reflect and to share their reflections, right? Green, I liked it. Amber, I'm confused. What? Red, no, I didn't like it. Don't do that again. Okay, useful way just to encourage that in the classroom for lower level or mostly younger learners. Personal emojis. You could, instead of asking maybe younger learners to write their reflections, you could ask them to design their own emoji about how they felt about a specific activity. I've done that too. Again, terrible drawing skills. Answers in the chat. What what feeling is John's emoji expressing? I don't know if you could. Oh no, I don't know if you could. Oh, there we go. There you go. You can see it. What feeling is this emoji expressing? Okay. Here's another. Can you see it? Oh no, not quite. Hang on. Oh, are we there? Yes. Okay. Oh, sort of. There we go. What feeling is John's emoji expressing here? And finally, for all the points, what feeling is John's emoji expressing here, if you can see it? Yeah, answers in the chat. If you can pass those, you can pass anything. Okay, you could play a game called Bucket Ball. Very briefly, Bucket Ball, you get 3 buckets, bins, whatever you've got to hand. You attach a question prompt to each one of them. What did you like today? What didn't you like today? What would you like to do again next time? What wouldn't you like to do again next time? You get a scrumpled up piece of paper or a ball, line students up in teams. They throw the ball, the piece of paper, into one of the bins. If it lands, they get a point for getting the ball in the bin and thinking about, reflecting on, and answering the reflective question. Okay, the more reflections you get, the more points the team gets. And it's active as well. You can create reflection snowballs as well, very similar. Students get a piece of paper, they write their reflection, answer to a question prompt probably on it, then they throw it to somebody on the other side of the room. If they catch it, they then open it up and they read the reflection and add their own reflection, throw it again, it becomes a snowball. Okay. So some very practical ideas here. I don't have time to go into this one in any detail, but if you like this idea of developing reflective practice in the classroom, you could go big, very big. Problem-based learning. There's a really useful paper on this by a researcher called Matthews A. Dinley. That's her surname. I forget her first name. But yeah, she kind of developed this system, which was developed by as part of the CAMS project. I love this acronym, Kids as Airborne Mission Scientists, developed by NASA Honestly, I'm not joking, to help develop collaborative critical thinking and reflective skills in middle school learners in America. So Matthew Zaydinley adapted that for the language classroom. There's a very, very detailed model of how you could use that there. This link is available in my useful links at the end as well. Okay, so finally, quick recap, couple of ideas. What can you do as a reflective practitioner? You can use a reflective journal. Maybe use one of the templates that I've developed there. Develop your own, adapt them, whatever works for you. Record your classes, right? You could record them with audio or video. You could record your reflections with audio or video. Make sure your students are okay with it if you video it. It doesn't have to be written. You could record them as kind of video blogs for yourself. Ask your students for their feedback. We've mentioned the importance of doing that in terms of rapport, engagement, students feeling valued and present in the learning process. Join peer discussions, peer observations, start peer discussions, peer observations if they're not already part of your context. And try and incorporate reflective thinking opportunities into lesson planning. Speaking as an observer as well as an observee here, you could have an extra column on your lesson plan for reflective thinking or critical thinking, creative thinking opportunities there. So make it a part of your practice. Read up. Like I mentioned, use the literature. If you want to dive deep, there's a big list at the end. Or just read people's blogs. There's a lot of simple, effective blogs about reflective practice for younger learners, kind of older learners, adults. It's all out there. Read on it, but don't read it. Don't read it for its own sake, right? Read it to help reach your goals, which you've developed through your reflective practice. Okay. So then, unfortunately, we won't have time for this, but I would have asked you to reflect again on what comes to mind now if you think about reflective practice. What would you like to try out? We'll do that another time. Okay, so post-webinar challenge, it's all there on the slides. There we go, link to all of our social media for Peartree languages there, and all of the notes at the end. Thank you very much. Sorry, we galloped rapidly through the end of that, but I hope it was useful.
Okay, thank you very much. What a very insightful presentation, I think. I don't know, we have one quick question right here. Is it me or Nikki is going to ask you? Okay, so right
I can ask the question, I think. Maybe John, if you stop sharing, if that's
Certainly.
all right.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm lost in reflection here. Yeah, that was absolutely amazing. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we had a question here that I mentioned that we were going to answer live. It's quite long, John. Okay, so I'm going to read it relatively slowly, just aware that we have about a minute for this. So so the anonymous attendee says, I would like to know, based on your experience, how effective it is to reflect after the class to improve our creativity and create a more engaging lesson on the same topic or different topics. For example, is there any testimony from students that your class or the way you teach the lesson is more interesting? Or do you notice students are more engaged after you try different activities after you did your reflective practice? Okay. That's the only question we had, at least in the live Q&A. So I guess that means you did it so comprehensively there are no more questions.
Let's hope. Or I've been bludgeoned into reflective submission. Yeah, okay. Amazing question, actually. So I do actually, to an extent, I practice what I preach. I'm going to do so even more after this. But yeah, I do actually try and reflect. It's not every week, to be honest. Probably every 2 or 3 weeks, I do take a bit of time to reflect on what I've been doing with my classes. And I do get feedback from students. So I teach a lot of one-to-one students, both presentially and digitally. So I try every 2 or 3 months with them. So I may try after today's session a little bit more often to just get them to take 10 minutes to reflect a little bit on what we've been doing, what's been useful for them, what maybe they'd like to do a bit more of, what they feel confident with now. And we kind of co-construct a list of areas that we'd like to look at next. Okay, so yeah, in my experience, that has led to much more engagement and much more of a feeling of being part of the teaching and learning process for the learners there. So this is with adults as well as teenage learners. So yeah, I think taking the time to ask them to reflect on what you've been doing with them, what's been good, what they'd like more of, what they think, no, enough, we've done that enough, we're cool now. And maybe, oh, do you know what? This is a bit of a gap. I'd like to study this in a bit more detail. Do that as a kind of a, not a formal process, but make it a regular part of what you do. I think it has a really positive effect in terms of just engagement, rapport, and developing these kind of reflective skills on the learner's part as well as the teachers.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, John. I believe we're probably pretty much at time, but as I said, there was only the one question, at least on the live session here. So I think we hand back over to English Academy now. But just on my behalf, thank you ever so much for attending today. Thank you very much also to John for that wonderful session, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So over to you, English Academy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki, and also John, for your presentation. That's very great. Hopefully everyone get an insight, and also they can also apply what you have shared in this webinar. So right now, I think we are finally at the end of our session, everybody. So once again, I just want to say thank you very much for everyone who is attending this webinar and also staying here until the end of our second session. And please don't forget, you will also receive a link of the certificate for this second session. And please also remember that the certificate is also editable, so you can just write your name directly. And also please make sure you can take a picture of this slide, you can screenshot, and also you can scan the QR code, or you can also type the link in order to get your certificate. And also please make sure you also stay tuned on our webinar series. There will be many more webinars coming, and also hopefully everybody will get many more insights from this sessions. And also once again, thank you for Nikki and John for your time, and also giving us a very impressive, I would say, okay, and also very great knowledge for everybody right here. And I think everybody can leave this session. Once again, thank you everyone, and hopefully you guys are always stay healthy, and also you can go back to whatever activities that you guys are going to do.